back to Yap Section, the show where we talk about pop culture, music, and fashion. I'm your host, Mia, and today we are talking about book-to-screen adaptations. Over the last few days, and I would like to say last few days, but it was really more like a day, I binged the new Amazon Prime Off-Campus series, which if you don't know what it is a series of books about hockey players, and it's a romance series that is now being adapted into a television show. And it is excellent. It is so good. And it got me thinking about a few different things in terms of both the TV show industry and the movie industry. First of all, I would like to say that my unpopular opinion is that I don't really believe in movie adaptations. I am much more pro TV show adaptations. I think that movies are a form that requires things to be very condensed. You only have 1 to 2 hours to tell a story. And, you could make it into a series of movies, but most of the time, people don't want to do that. There's also always the risk that it gets canceled before you can complete the story in a series of movies. For instance, I remember I got really into the Fifth Wave books when I was younger, and there is a singular movie for 4 different books because it got canceled before it could continue on. And I think you really see this with the Off-Campus Story, because the Off-Campus Story is an ensemble story, kind of similar to Bridgerton. Each book follows a different couple and a different set of characters. And it really allows you to give those characters room to shine on their own, for us to really get to know them. Because I think a lot of times when you don't get that space, you end up with shallower characters who might have been very important to the plot. And I feel like one of the best examples of this in terms of movies is, I'm so sorry, Suzanne Collins, I love The Hunger Games, but I could really tell something was missing when I went to go watch Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And that was someone who didn't even read the book. I went to see the movie and I was like, something is missing. Part of the storyline feels like it's not totally clicking, the depth of it isn't making sense. The love story between Lucy Gray and Snow felt somewhat rushed, and I didn't really understand that depth. I feel like even Snow's character, I didn't feel like I totally understood how we went from that Coriolanus Snow to Hunger Games Coriolanus Snow, which that story is the point of. That's supposed to explain how we got there. I remember going to see that movie with 2 of my friends who had read the book, and when I left the theater and I was like, I didn't like that movie a lot. I felt like it was missing a lot. I haven't read the book, but I can tell there were some crucial points in there to make this story cohesive and make it make sense and make it the depth of what Suzanne Collins' writing is. And they were like, no, you're absolutely correct. And they told me about several characters who were very much pushed to the side as side characters with a limited amount of screen time for obvious reasons, including that you're trying to condense this book down into 2 hours, that were very important and very integral to the plot and what happens. And because their stories are essentially erased and removed for the sake of time, it ends up kind of cheapening the material a bit, unfortunately. If you guys can't tell, I really like romance, so I was trying to think of a non-romance example, but I feel like another example of this would be the fan reaction to Percy Jackson, the movie that was made back in the 2010s, versus fans' reactions to Percy Jackson, the TV series, which fans love and adore. I didn't read Percy Jackson, unfortunately. Despite it being a YA book, it's still on my list of books to read. I've heard nothing but excellent things about it. But from what I understand, the movie very much had to cut out a whole bunch of stuff, because even though it was crazy, one movie for how many Percy Jackson books are there? 8? And you decided to try and condense 8 probably 150, 200 page books into 2 hours? That's insane. That's crazy. And it makes much more sense, especially if you're doing a series adaptation, for it to be a series, to be a television series, to really get the full depth of everything that you want to be in there. I think this also just leads into a lot of the problems and qualms that I feel like I have with movies at the moment. Luckily, we are also in an era where it seems that authors get a lot more say in how their work is produced on the screen. Again, I don't know whether or not Rick Riordan had a lot of hand in how that movie was created in the early 2000s. I can't imagine that he did have a lot of creative control or say how that was going to unfold. However, I do believe he is a very heavy presence on the current set, which reflects in the quality of how it is. And I feel like a great example of how much more options that these authors have of what to do with their work comes to, there's a very famous, I believe, fantasy author. His name is Brandon Sanderson, and he has made so many books. I don't even know how many books, but he ended up auctioning off one set of the books to Apple TV. And I think a lot of people were surprised that Apple TV was the one to get the series, because if you look at all the like streaming platforming giants, Apple TV still falls a bit below, you know, like a Netflix or a Hulu or even like an Amazon Prime. Why would he not want to almost get the most money out of this deal? But from what I know about that deal, Apple TV essentially told that man, like, full creative control. Like, you get full creative control over this show, which is obviously very appealing to someone. If you've spent as much time as I can only imagine this man has pouring time and effort into your books, and now you need to go introduce it in a new medium to a new audience, I too would want pretty much as much creative control as I could get over that series. Or I would just need to know that it's in like the best of the best hands, because I will say the Bridgerton series is also based off a series of books, but the original writer of that series is not heavily involved in that process. And for the better, maybe. I think her allowing Shondaland to take creative control over that project and expand it in terms of, you know, that adaptation, and allowing Shonda to take creative control over that allowed for Shonda's process of colorblind casting, which gave us much more intriguing and unique storylines in the series, including, you know, Kate Sharma. Shonda takes aspects like the character's heritage, or not the character, but rather I guess the actor, kind of, because in the books, Kate Sharma is not a character of Indian descent. However, obviously in the TV show she is. And there were just such beautiful scenes to come from that, including like the marriage rituals, the bangles. There was so much beauty to adding in that cultural aspect to the show that wasn't originally there. And on top of that, the Queen Charlotte series is a completely original work by Shondaland. And so I think, you know, when maybe book to screen adaptations were first a thing, I think authors kind of maybe had no choice but to hand over your work to the network and wipe their hands of it and let them do what they were going to do with it, whether or not you kind of liked how it was going to turn out. I would say maybe that change started in like 2016-ish, when To All the Boys I Loved Before came out, and Jenny Han, who was the writer of that book, became very heavily involved in that process. Like, if you ever watch any of those TV shows or movies that she's written, she's always on set. There's like a cameo of her in there. That's how much she's involved in it. She posts all the behind the scenes content for their social media. She is very heavily involved in that process, which is why I do think we've gotten better at like book to screen adaptations, because I will tell you, some of those early 2000s ones are horrible. Again, Percy Jackson, the Series of Unfortunate Events series, I did read that one. Absolutely terrible. Again, why would you try and condense 13 books into a 2-hour movie? The logic wasn't logicking there. Maybe it was also they just didn't know they could make as much money off of the book to screen adaptations as they do now, because those, in a sea of very unoriginal ideas that keep coming to our screen, at least book to movie adaptations have kind of a built-in audience. People are eager to see that. So you have built-in audience plus new audience. And that's kind of the thing with Hollywood lately, is they are very risk averse. They don't want to take any risk in what they are producing and risk losing the money, which is why we keep getting sequels and live actions and, you know, the book to screen adaptations. Not to hate on them, but the lack of original ideas in Hollywood is very evidently showing. And I think it also saves them the time of having to come up with an entirely new idea and have something new to the screen without it being, you know, something they have to think of by themselves. Another great example, Heated Rivalry. I would dare to say maybe one of the first like gay hockey shows out there. And that existed as a book, but they didn't have to pull that idea out of their ass and come up with it themselves. They just had to pull it from the book. This brings me into another one of my qualms about Hollywood. Please start making more original movies. If I see one more spin-off, sequel, or live action, I will in fact scream. Because the concept of a Moana live action movie coming out before we've finished out the Moana saga is insane. There is going to be a third movie. I watched that second movie. They left it on a cliffhanger. There will be a third movie. Why are you making a live action movie. Also, why are you heat curling that girl's naturally curly hair? That's a different beef for a different day. But like, why are we doing that before we've even finished the series? That's insane to me. That's so crazy to me. And I don't know why we haven't learned our lesson yet, Disney, because that Snow White live action flopped so hard. And I mean, we all kind of know why it flopped. And Rachel Zegler, you were never the problem. I love you so much. Phenomenal actress, phenomenal singer, just with, I don't know, I think she cracked a mirror when she was a kid or something for her career to keep going the way that it does in terms of the movie industry. But it did so bad in the box office. They lost $170 million, allegedly, from that production because it was crap. So why don't we start investing in a few more original movies? And I saw an article that did say that, like, supposedly Hollywood is trying to invest in original movies. It was written in 2025. But it was like, people aren't going to original movies. And I think part of the problem with that, this is the thing with TV shows too, is like, sometimes you girls, your marketing game is just shit. Like, we don't go to the original movie because we don't know the original movie exists. I think a good example of this would be like, obviously there's a bigger name attached to this project, but the drama had phenomenal marketing. And as someone who does not go to the movies a lot, I went to go see the drama because the marketing was so phenomenal. Same thing with Sinners, although it had a bigger name attached to it. But I also think, actually, Sinners was kind of a one-of-a-kind incident where it just like blew up. It was such a good movie that I feel like word of mouth just got out about how good it was. And also because it was, you know, a predominantly Black cast and done by Ryan Coogler, who is like Black director GOAT. People were more compelled to go see it. But I feel like last year's Oscars should prove to production studios that there's money in original screenplays, because not only did Sinners blow up, break box office records, it was the highest grossing original screenplay of the 2020s, as well as the third highest grossing horror movie that's rated R, I think, like ever. And on top of that, One Battle After Another, which was also named an original screenplay, technically it is very loosely based on a novel, but I guess enough was changed to declare it an original screenplay, won for Best Picture at the Oscars. Sinners and One Battle After Another were probably the two most talked about films in terms of the Oscars. Sorry to Marty Supreme. No, I'm not. And so I really hope that studios take lead from that and realize that audiences are hungry for something that is not a sequel and is not a spinoff and is not a live action. We would like something original, please. This is a little weird to like have this episode and be talking about movies that I haven't seen personally and kind of going more so through off the grapevine, but I have not heard good things about Devil Wears Prada 2. The only good things I've heard about Devil Wears Prada 2 is that it like kind of exposed how bad AI was to the print and like media industry. But other than that, it seems like people had a lot of complaints, and namely with the characters. And something that I think people don't take into consideration when you're like trying to make a sequel simply for the sake of making a sequel because it was such a popular movie is, did you leave off in the first movie for a place where it would make sense to have a sequel? And Devil Wears Prada 2, I think, is such a great and famous movie because you don't leave off in a place where you should have a sequel. Because at the end, everyone's character arcs are like kind of complete, especially when we're thinking in terms of Andy. And so when you have a character whose character arc is complete, but now you want to tell a different story for them, you kind of either have to completely break out of the character and give them a whole new flaw or problem, which now makes them different from the original character that the audience fell in love with. Or from what I hear is the other option, and what they did to Andy is kind of almost have them regress and undo the work that they did in the original TV show, movie, whatever. So like, you know, in the original movie, Andy is kind of unsure of herself. She's finding her footing. She's stumbling. She's bumbling, all these other kind of things. And by the end, she seems to have a much more assured sense of self. And from what I hear about the second movie, it does sound like they've taken some of that away and she's back to kind of being stumbling and bumbling and how she was when she first got to the magazine when she's talking to Miranda Priestley. And I hate that because, like, what was the point of doing that? This was not a story that needed to have a second movie to it. It didn't make sense for it to keep on continuing. you guys actually could have taken a whole nother set of characters and just done this movie instead, it sounds like. But ultimately, and what comes to be the problem both in movies and in television, is that studios are just going to chase the check, even if it means at the expense of the creative value and the quality of whatever work they are producing. And I see this too with television shows like, girls, Grey's Anatomy should not still be on. Like, Meredith Grey isn't even there. There's not a Grey on the show. And I know she pops in occasionally, but the main character is gone and you girls are still running that show? That's insane. Shut it down. And for that, I will accept a spinoff if necessary. And we've seen the spinoffs can be successful. I watched Station 19. Give it a spinoff. Give it a spinoff. It's not Grey's Anatomy anymore. It's just anatomy. Please, please let it end. Let it end. It feels like a girl who is on life support, who has a DNR, and they keep resuscitating her anyways, okay? Do not resuscitate anymore. Let her die. Let her die. Let it shrivel up and die. All in all, my final notes are stop making book to movie adaptations. Doesn't work. Just make it a TV show. If you don't want to make it like an ongoing TV show, limited series are in fact a thing now. And please stop giving us live action remakes and reboots and spin-offs and whatever. Just give us something original, please. We're hungry. Maybe that is why the theater is failing. Did you ever think of that? That's my take on it. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. Bye.